Okay, you know about content now. You know that what really makes content is the context, is the context that you put on it. So now, what to now? Where do you start now that you know that? Now, what's important is you need to choose your weapon of choice. And when I say weapon of choice, you need to choose how you're going to go about sharing this content. So if you guys can remember, we made the exception, or we made the example of the coconut, meaning that it wasn't about the coconut, it was how you chose to share and the context you put on the coconut. So now you have to choose what is the best way to go about that. Are you going to make a video while talking about the coconut? Are you going to take pictures and just use that to describe your story and explain your story? Or are you just not even going to have pictures at all and just write about the story? And not to mention, you can do multiple different ways of putting these different contents together. You can take a picture and then write about it in a post. You can take a video, write about it in a post. You can do a video and have pictures in the video and write about it. You can do all these mixed match of things, but you need to understand you have three ways to do it. You have written, which I've spoke about many times on podcasts and different platforms. You have written, you have spoken, and you have video. Now, video, of course, is the most powerful. Video captures kind of what we're used to seeing. We can see how the person talks. Are they using hand gestures? Like, are they being serious? Are they looking right into the camera, even if they have eye allergy? But it's something that's very important that you need to really choose which way you're going to go about doing this. And I think that when you can choose the approach, and you need to understand that all of these approaches, video, written, and voice, that you're going to be better at one of these. We're going to shine. One of them is going to feel more comfortable. And the way that I describe it to people is which form of content do you feel the most flow? Or how long does it, which one do you get into flow the easiest and feels most comfortable? For me, I like writing, but it takes a long time for me to get into flow. Flow means you're not thinking about it. It's just smooth coming out. Like, this is fun. You get into a zone where you're doing it. This is like flow. And you can technically find flow in all these. For me personally, I get in the easiest flow in video. I cut the video on, boom, I'm ready to go. When it comes to voice, I kind of can get started, but as I pick up steam, it's like, okay, now I'm good to go. I can talk for hours. But when it comes to written, it takes a very specific environment. It takes a little bit of time to get that momentum going, and then finally I get into flow later on. So for me, I know what my strengths are. And so basically for you, you need to find it out. And you also need to try it. You can't just say, oh, I'm better at this. You need to try different ways and use the 1 and 2 method, I call it, meaning that you'll have these three ways of getting content out. And what you want to do is find which one of these is the strongest and label them 1, 2, 3. And you want to incorporate the best one with the second one. So if you're really good at writing and your second best is voice, then when you look at that, we'll talk about all this later, podcasts and all that kind of stuff. You look at, okay, a podcast is good because I'm great at voice, and my second strength is writing. So then you say, okay, well, I need to write really good show notes in my podcast, have them on a website, because the power of written word is that it's searchable, it's rankable. So it means that when you write something, because if you're on this topic, which this is not the main thing of this video, but if you're doing voice, it's hard to be ranked and found by that. You got to have something written that people can find. So once you've chosen that, when you know where to start, so let's say you found it. Yours is video. So now, Luke, I found my weapon of choice. Okay, because this can take some time. It will change. Like, you're not comfortable in video, but then after you shoot about 8 or 9 videos, you realize that you are more comfortable in video. And the great thing about video is you can always strip the video. I can literally black out this screen right now and just talk. You don't see me, but you can hear everything. So technically it can work. It's great for multi-purposing the content that you have. So now that you know you've chosen your weapon of choice, now what do you do? So basically, when it comes to content, content is you. Now you need to share your content. That is you picking up a weapon to go to the world. I know it's not the best analogy, but you can understand. So you have 3 weapons to choose from. Now it's voice, it's written, and it's video. And now it's choosing what is your weapon of choice. So for me, boom, it's video. Now where do I start? This is what we're trying to actually get into. Yours is voice. Where do you start? Yours is writing. Now where do you start? Now you have the pen. And it's very simple, and it's something I recommend to a lot of people. Start with your story. Start with your stories. People's stories are so unique because everyone's perspective is so different. But the problem that people come to with stories is they kind of forget about their own story. Like, for me, I'll go out and film all this stuff during the day, and I totally forget that, oh, these people don't know who I am, what I do, or anything. I got to actually say that or write it in the description. It's very important, your story. Are you someone who grew up in who are you? Like, okay, I'm following you. You're showing me all this stuff, but who are you? You know, and starting with your story, you'll attract a lot of people who can relate to that. You know, at some point through this course of you putting out content, what's your origin story? Now is the time period when people need to be, you need to be building your origin story. And if you have a bunch of content out there, just make one piece of content right now explaining who are you. I'm literally gonna do it on my channel because people have no idea maybe who I am. Maybe someone just joined yesterday or today. So you need to start with your story and understand that it's never too late to do it. You can have 1,000 podcast episodes out. You can always drop one explaining who you are. You can have 1,000 videos out. You can always drop a video explaining who you are. You can have 1,000 blog posts and make one explaining who you are. Start with your story because it'll put everything else into context. Because we take Superman, for example, knowing his origin story, that his planet was destroyed. He didn't know who his real parents are. He arrived on a new planet. All that stuff makes him who he is, and you start to understand why he had a hard time fitting in as a kid. You know, I know about Superman. He's originally from Cleveland, the person who wrote the story, so I'm pretty well familiar with Superman. But it's very important, the origin story. You know, in the comic world, they say that a character is only as good as his origin story. Because if you introduce a character and you don't know anything about his origin, then you're confused at what's his motive, what's his weakness, what's his strength, what's going on, who is this person? You know, and I think that story, that origin, makes that bond with your audience. And maybe you don't have an audience yet, but the audience who will come will know exactly where they fit in and they can relate to where you are now. Because most of us, if you're anything like me, you're not where you necessarily want to be at. For me, I'm looking to go way further ahead, way higher and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, people are going to bond with that original, that very beginning. Like I thought time to time that I'm going to delete the earlier videos on YouTube because they were horrible. I didn't know what I was doing. But that has been the motivation for so many people that I've heard. So many people have left comments on that video like, wow, so this is where you started. So all of a sudden your story lets people know where you've come from, and more importantly, puts more context on you. Knowing that you were raised from a family who could barely feed you means a lot more once you've made it for yourself and you've made a name for yourself than someone who their father was there and then they passed it on to them, so that's how they got there. You know, it's kind of the difference between a millionaire and a self-made millionaire. So start with your story. Dig into your story. Talk about your story. Let people know who you are. You know, one thing that I always try to do with all pieces of content is try to put myself in there. You know, I read Kevin Hart's book, which I highly recommend you guys all read. He also has a Netflix series out as well. But one thing that I heard about him way before he got famous was what really changed him and the way he did stand-up comedy. Kevin Hart's a comedian, just to put it in context. He's a very famous comedian. Is he went on stage, he performed his show, his comic sketch, and when he came down, he went to this guy like, yo, that was awesome, wasn't I? Got it. And they were just like, you know, Kevin, they were like, yeah, you were funny. You made everyone laugh. He's like, but that's what everyone does. Everyone does that. You got to make yourself stand out. And then Kevin was like, what can I do to make myself stand out? He's like, tell your story. Share your story. Tie your story in. No one can replicate that joke because no one has been through that same exact experience. So the stories that I tell are all based off of my experience and the things that I've been through. When I'm in the vlog, and the earliest I can think of, the last one I can think of is arriving in Malaysia, and I was filming, and I was with my best friend, Russell, and we're filming, and all of a sudden, I was like, oh, that's a Boost, that's a smoothie company. And I could have just been like, it's an Australian smoothie company, and that could have been the end of the scene. But no, I tied it back into myself in my story. So I was like, oh, it's Boost. It's an Australian company. I used to go there every day before when I lived in Australia for 2 years in Melbourne. I love that place. So now I've taken that smoothie place that easily could have just been looked over as just part of the story, like whatever. And I tied that into my own personal story that gives people a little bit more context and gives them something to be like more curious about. Like, wait a minute, he lived in Australia for 2 years. What did he do? Now you've intrigued them. If I were to just be like, oh, smoothie shop, that's Australian base. Anyone can find that out by Googling. But if you tie it in with your story, you automatically are differentiating yourself from other people and other people's story. We all can do the same thing, but our experiences will be so different based on our story, based on the things we've been through, based on where we're from. You know, that's a very, very important key to remember. You know, we do this all the time when we just meet someone and we ask where they're from, we find out where they're from. We automatically formulate all these ideas, you know, and make all these assumptions. And regardless of whether we're right or whether that's wrong, we just do it, even if it's on the smallest level. The second when I'm traveling around and I meet someone from Spain or from France, like, I'm just like, I speak to them in their language. I speak Spanish, I speak French. So I know automatically, since they're from there, they automatically speak that language. And that's a good, I speak that language. So I'm connected. I feel connected to them. And of course, I used to live there for 7 years. So I'm really connected to that. So by knowing someone's story, where they're from, the origin, you make your bond stronger. You can tell we all have infinite stories. As I told you, this whole mastermind is built on case studies that I've done on myself. Because we've all been through things, we've all overcome things, and the things we've overcome make us realize and shape the world that we see today. So by telling your story, you let other people know how exactly you were shaped. And by showing those parts that were vulnerable, the parts that weren't easy, the parts that were hard, the difficult lessons you learned, the times you failed, by sharing all of these things, you not only humanize yourself and make yourself more vulnerable, but you invite other people in to do the same thing. So if there's one thing you get from this, it's to start with your story. Even if that means starting, the next piece of content you put out is, who are you? Literally name that video, who is whatever your name is, and you fill in that blank and you just talk about it. And if someone ever comes back, one thing that I love about content and why I've inspired so many videos to do this for myself is that when someone asks that question, who are you, what do, you can refer them to that content. You don't have to go over that spiel again. Like, I've been traveling for the last few months, almost a year now of traveling. And the one thing, as I was staying in hostels the first 7 or 8 months, I was always having to give my origin story. And as you start to say it over and over again, you start to be like, it starts to lose a little bit of its magic, because you're like, I've said it like 50 times today. So I'm just going to give a summary. You know, before it's like, oh yeah, I was pro athlete. I was in Australia and Germany, and now I'm in France, and I've just kind of stopped for a little bit. But then you get to a point where it's like, my simple answer was, hi, I'm from the world and I'm here. Oh, you are too? Awesome. That's literally what my summary turned into, from just staying in the hostels all the time, having new people 3 or 4 times. You're explaining your story each day to new people who are coming in the room. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you could be like, yo, this is me, very simply explain who you are in 2 sentences. And then if people are more curious, have a place that you can refer them to. Because it's not like in real life, people are going to write comments on your blog post, on your podcast, writing you. And it's like, oh, this is who I am. And if you really want more information, you can go here and find it. So you understand exactly how important your story is, because that's what makes you you. So when trying to figure out where to start with the content after you've chosen your weapon of choice, which I will explain that. We'll have different sections on here. They're probably here now. If not, they'll be here soon, on the different forms of writing, of video, of audio, how you can share it, what's the best method to share it, how to optimize when you do share it, and how to build that tribe. But start with you, start with your story. Where are you from? What made you start this? This should be the very first thing that you do. The very first thing, and if you've already had all this content, it's never too late to start. Start with your story. Oh, the camera's here. Start with your story. That would be my advice, and that is what's worked for me, and that's what I always tell people, because we all know it so well. No one knows our story as good as we do. And from your story, not only do you give your perspective, but when someone hears it, they have their own perspective that they have of it. So that's the power. Give your story, tell your story, share your story, and more importantly, start with your story.